it's gone wrong.
This party in Brighton was a milestone in dance music.
It was this perfect night, the vibe and the music, and then the superstar DJ.
Literally dance all night.
That was the trailer for Right Here, Right Now, streaming on Sky and Now TV. And this is Factual America. I'm your host, Matthew Sherwood. Each week I watch a hit documentary and then talk with the filmmakers and their subjects. In 2002, superstar DJ Fatboy Slim organized a free beach party for his hometown of Brighton, England. 40,000 ravers were expected, but 250,000 turned up. Right Here, Right Now brings us the story behind dance music's most infamous gig. Join us as director and writer Jak Hutchcraft discusses not only what it is like to work with a super DJ like Fatboy Slim, but also how a freelance journalist with the courage of his convictions turned a great story idea into a successful first-time feature-length documentary. Stay tuned. Jak Hutchcraft, welcome to Factual America. How are things with you?
Things are really good, thank you, Matthew. Nice to meet you. I'm on cloud nine today and have been for the whole month. How are you feeling today?
I'm feeling great. I'm in Yorkshire, which I think you're originally from, aren't you?
That's right. Yeah, you're in New York.
Yeah,
I do research on you, by the way, as well.
Well, good. Well, you better. I think more people should. But where in Yorkshire are you from originally?
I'm from North Yorkshire, so just a bit further north than New York, where you are. So a place called Richmond, which you might have visited. It's got a nice waterfall and a castle.
Yes, I know Richmond well. I'm actually living in Moulton at the moment, so
lovely.
Moved a little further out. So yeah, North Yorkshire, the moors, all that stuff. We love it up here. So, but that's not. We're not here now. We've lost the entire audience, so we may have to edit this out. But what we're talking about, and the reason you're on cloud nine, is we're talking about a film called Right Here, Right Now, released earlier this month here in the UK, streaming on Sky Documentaries, and Now TV. And I think you were telling me before we started, you can't find it elsewhere, at least legally. But there are plans to have a wider release. Is that right?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. So it's out on Sky, like you said, and Now TV. But I mean, Fatboy Slim is so big everywhere, really, in the world.
Yeah.
Like he tours constantly, and massive fan base in South America, in America, in Australia, Europe, Asia. Literally everywhere. We kind of cover it in the film, the kind of far-reaching fan base that he has. So yeah, it'll be seen all over the world eventually, and that's what we're working on.
I'm sure it will. Now, you've already mentioned Fatboy Slim, and just to get us started, why don't you let our audience know? This is how we usually get started on this on the show. Is what is Right Here, Right Now all about? Okay,
so there's a British DJ called Fatboy Slim, and he's what people call a superstar DJ. That he's massive. So like he was like a lot of DJ culture kind of came through the clubs and the illegal rave scene in the UK, and then DJs started getting bigger. They started getting songs on Top of the Pops, and then by the end of the 90s, DJs such as Fatboy Slim and Chemical Brothers and others like them were having #1 albums. Like this is from the clubs to #1 records. So at this time, just as the turn of the century, 2002, he decided to have a free party on Brighton Beach. So Brighton is on the south coast of England, and it's Fatboy Slim, or Norman Cook. That's his name. It's his home, and kind of, although he's not from here, it's kind of his spiritual home.
Yeah.
And he threw a free party on the beach. Anyone could come. It was on a Saturday evening in 2002, and they were expecting around 50,000 people to attend, because the year before they'd had that number. There's around 50,000.
Yeah.
And it was manageable. And then something happened on the day, July 13th, 2002, which meant that 50,000 people didn't turn up. In fact, 250,000 people turned up. So 250,000 people rocked up from all over the country and came from Europe, came to the beach to see Fatboy Slim, Midfield General, and John Digweed DJ that day. So there's some strange magic in the end. So my documentary is about this one event that it changed people's lives that went there, some for better or for worse. And it changed the way we run events in the UK. It changed dance culture and club culture and electronic music. It changed that forever, really, especially in the UK. And kind of the perceptions around DJs and what they can do. And it's just got a kind of a special place in a lot of people's hearts in the UK as a kind of Woodstock. I'm talking about the original Woodstock for ravers. This is like a mass gathering of people who just wanted to dance and be free on the beach. And it wasn't without its problems. Obviously, with that many people, you will get that. But I tried to cover it in a fair way. So it's a long way of telling the story. It's about an event that got out of hand.
Yes,
that's what it's about.
Yes, and we've actually had there's been other docs about events that nearly went out of hand. We've even had one of the two Woodstock '99 docs on, which there's an interesting tie-in here because Fatboy Slim was there as well. But he, I mean, one thing that your film does, and it touches on many, as you say, I think it's a very good description. There's this event called Big Beach Boutique 2, right? Is that what it's, And just for me, you may have figured out I wasn't originally from this country, but I moved over here in 2001. And in 2002, and we'd been here, I'd been hearing things about, well, as you said, they'd already broken big, a lot of, this stuff. But, even growing up, in the 90s, you're hearing things about stuff that's coming from Britain. You're having another British invasion, if you will. And, culminating in my own personal story, 2002, I'm even in Alaska at my brother-in-law's wedding, and I've got a guy there asking me about the house scene in Britain, Wow. And I wasn't even into it, but he just assumed this guy from London must know something about it. So it's huge. It's so maybe you can say, because one thing that I think you've gotten some good reviews is that it's a really good, it really gives a good synopsis of what led up to this event. So maybe you've kind of already talked about it, but for British, non-British audiences alike, this is as you said, an event of a generation. There's a whole generation grew up in sort of the 80s and 90s, and I didn't, but a lot of these people are about my age or a little bit younger, and this thing was huge.
Yes, that's
DJs
right.
were massive.
Yeah, that's right. It was like they were big in the 90s, but then by the early 2000s, they were having like I said, number one singles and like pop hit records, and taking it over to America. Fatboy Slim did a good job of exporting that to America, which was difficult, which it wasn't such a big part of the American music scene in the 90s, not as much as it was in the UK. But yeah, what happened is, and I tried to chart it in the film, is in the late 80s, there's an acid house scene in the UK. A lot of it's underground clubs and illegal raves. People just into the early 90s, people just turning up to a field, sound system, dancing all night, getting shut down by the cops. Right. And that had a real kind of it had a real free energy to it. And so that's kind of where the story starts. It's not where Norman Cook's story starts, because Norman Cook, Fatboy Slim, was in a pop band called the Housemartins through the 80s.
I didn't even realize that. I know about the Housemartins, but I had no idea he was, Fatboy Slim was in the Housemartins.
I know, yeah. So it's cool. So he already had, tastes of the music industry and had a lot of success with the Housemartins. And then, like I said, this acid house and electronic music was kind of underground, but it was gaining traction in the UK with the illegal rave scene, and then clubs as well. And then there was a criminal justice bill that came in that was imposed by the government that said that, they couldn't outright ban raves because I don't think they could actually I don't know how they'd ever word that properly.
Yeah.
So they decided to crack down on raving and people, being free, dancing in fields all night, something that they couldn't control. What's a kind of anarchist spirit of acid house and the rave scene. Because they couldn't control that, that's a bit of a threat to the government, isn't it, and how things run. So they imposed this criminal justice bill, and that said that if you have 4 or 5 or more people dancing around a sound system with repetitive beats, this is literally what it says, repetitive beats. So if you're playing jazz or something like that, that's fine. But if it's repetitive beats, that's the wording they used. And then they cracked down on the rave scene. So people got thrown in prison, promoters, ravers. And so then how it changed is super clubs kind of were born, and club culture became more mainstream in people's tastes. So did these clubs started popping up, these big clubs, and it was ticketed, and that was a whole different culture. Oh well, an extension of the original culture,
Right.
And that still goes on today. There's massive clubs in the UK.
Yeah.
But that was through the late 90s, and then by 2002, when clubs were the norm, club culture was big, was mainstream really. Norman Cook, Fatboy Slim, as I said, decided to throw a free beach party. And this was not for any other reason than he loves Brighton, and he just wanted to celebrate Brighton and everything that he loves about it, and invite the world down. Little did he know the world actually turned up. Like little did he expect the world actually turned up. But and that's how he got to that. That's how we got there. So like that is a very reductive, I guess, and brief overview of the dance culture in the UK. But that's the journey I took, trying to take the viewer on, from the raves, from the early dance culture in the UK, through the mill of the mainstream and popular culture and super clubs, and then one last blowout. That's what it kind of feels like. This big beach boutique is like one last blowout before the drawbridge gets pulled up, the line gets drawn in the sand. We can't have free parties anymore. Well, people still do, but of that scale. So that's the journey for anyone that doesn't know.
And then, so I mean, it's quite a journey to go from the Housemartins to what Fatboy Slim became. I mean, what is his genius, basically? How would you describe it? Because he's taken this boy from Bromley, who's now Spiritual Homes in Brighton, but it is quite a journey he's on as well.
Yes, exactly. What is his genius? I've thought about this a lot, and I don't think people are geniuses. I think people have geniuses in different parts of their life.
Right.
And so I think the genius that he had and still has, he doesn't put out music anymore. He just plays live shows, but is kind of like a crate digger, like a hip hop producer's approach to dance music, right? So so like of his hits, like his big hits are like made up of samples of like often obscure soul, Motown, rock, psychedelic rock, like hip hop, breaks, all sorts of vinyls that he's obviously, because he used to be a record collector. And he's obviously got a musical brain because he used to play bass in the Housemartins, and he did loads of projects between then and Fatboy Slim, including Freak Power and Beats International, who were big successes as well. So I think his genius in making the records was taking these things that I don't even know how you do that. Like for example, Right Here, Right Now is a sample of an orchestral outro on a song by the James Gang. Do you know the James Gang?
Yeah.
It's like 10-second part of this orchestral outro. That's a and if you really listen to that, even if you wanted to make music, if you listen to that by itself, I don't know how you'd go, boom, that's the number one. That's a number one record. And then he took a sample from Strange Days, the film Strange Days.
Yeah.
It's got Juliette Lewis in it. It took a sample from that and put it over the top. And I think, like on paper, if you looked at any of his hits on paper, and that goes for Rockefeller Skank, which is a sample of like the intro of a Lord Finesse song, you know, like where he's just right about now, the funk soul, brother. You think anything like this, it becomes greater than the sum of its parts. And if you looked at it on paper, you'd think, well, that's not a number one dance record. But then you're like, he's got rock samples. In the first album, he samples The Who. You know, he samples Black Sabbath. You think, what the fuck, man? Like that. It's a strange genius, but it is a genius because it's not like let's stick to the rules of having like a 4 to the floor beat with some dreamy pianos over the top and a female vocal. It's like let's take a soul sample from the 60s. Let's take a rock guitar. Let's put some like let's put some like breaks in it from hip hop, a break beat. It's a strange thing. And then live, I think coming from the rock world or pop world, I think he has this natural swagger, this natural kind of showmanship that perhaps DJs didn't always have or don't always have. But he's coming from like playing on top of the pops with his band. He's a bit of a he gets the crowd going, you know what I mean?
Right.
So I think between those two things are his genius. And I think a musician who obviously knows a lot about music and he's a record collector, someone like that making electronic music, sample heavy music, it's just a different beast altogether. It's a different, it's just unique, I think, really unique.
And then it just resonated with such a sizable part of the population in a generation. It's just it's almost like a perfect storm. But I agree with you about the hip hop analogy, and also, you wouldn't just think, okay, I'm going to take this one very small, extremely small sample or riff and just repeat it over and over and over again and lay a beat on top and all this other stuff that he does that I would never even be able to think about and think that and play it for 6-7 minutes and think that that's going to be a hit. But it did, and it is. I mean, he's still, as you say, he's amazingly popular.
It's a strange thing. He has a real crossover appeal, like a real crossover appeal that I think is owed to not only the strength of the songs and his live show and the club night that he used to run in Brighton, but like, I don't know, something about the music that it appeals to indie crowds, rock crowds, it appeals to hip hop crowds, because it's the genre originally was coined big beat because it was a bit different to house that was happening at the time, and it's a bit slower and it's a bit more kind of it's quite hard to define, I think, big beat, because bands like Prodigy were also called big beat by some people, and Chemical Brothers, and it's a lot of it's sample heavy. Like I said, I think it comes more from a hip hop approach to making electronic music than perhaps a trance or house DJ. That's what I would say. Wow. Like seeing, like I've got Enemy covers from the late 90s, and he's on the front cover, and you think there's not many DJs that made it onto the front cover of Enemy. There's like Orbital, there's a few, but in general, DJs were kind of roasted by the Enemy. Even in those Enemies, even though he's on the front cover, he's obviously the cover star in the article, because it's the late 90s. And it's the Enemy. They're so snidey. They're like, it's music for zombies. You just press play and all this kind of shit. You think, well, why'd you put him on the front cover, man? Yeah,
well, they're trying to sell some magazines.
The crossover appeal is real. And then for him to go and do it in America, kind of break America, people thought he was a band. That's the thing. That's the funny thing. People.
There's that one intro. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
It's like, it's not even a band, man. It's a one-man show.
I feel like, except we'd get in trouble with copyright and this never would get released on YouTube. I do feel like we should be having this music playing on in the background, or certainly when we go to outros and whatever, but take a break. But actually, speaking of which, why don't we give our listeners and viewers a quick early break here? We'll be right back with the director of Right Here, Right Now, Jak Hutchcraft, who also wrote the film. It's on Sky and streaming on Sky and Now TV in the UK. But if you're not in the UK, don't worry, it's going to be coming your way shortly. You're listening to Factual America. Subscribe to our mailing list or follow us on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter at Alamo Pictures to keep up to date with new releases or upcoming shows. Check out the show notes to learn more about the program, our guests, and the team behind the production. Now back to Factual America. Welcome back to Factual America. I'm here with Jak Hutchcraft, the director and writer of Right Here, Right Now on Sky and Now TV. So we've been talking about Fatboy Slim, the culture of the time, what it was all leading up to. I mean, DJs. I mean, I even in the early 2000s, I remember my wife was working at a place and they were really excited. I mean, I can't probably mention what the place was, but it's nothing to do with music. And they got Goldie to be their big spokesman, you know.
Wow.
And they were everyone was like really excited about it, you know. That's where we were with these things. But so this event, Big Beach Boutique 2, it all leads up to this. Your film leads up to it. It's almost a disaster. I mean, the side of, Brighton more than doubles in size with all these people. For some, it's the best day of their life, and for others, it's one they would rather forget. And you show both sides of that. I mean, how that was a definitive. Well, as you said, you try to show both sides and be as objective as possible. But it's interesting how one event can I don't want to say divide. I wouldn't say it's 50-50, but there's certainly for a few people they would rather not relive that, and then for others it's one of the best days of their lives.
Yes, yeah. I just want to is it prelude what I'm going to say? Even though I talked about the genius of Fatboy Slim just a moment ago, that's personal opinion. The documentary is, as you said, it's not Fatboy Slim isn't the focus really. It's about the event and the people that it affected. Yeah, it's not like a kind of like a biography of Fatboy Slim and everything I like about him. So yeah, it is interesting. But you know what? This is why I was drawn to the story. I thought that many people there. I'm a journalist, so I write and I make podcasts and I make documentaries sometimes. So I'm always looking for stories, and I was drawn to this because I thought that many people in one place, there must be some stories there, you know. There must be like 250,000 people, and as he said, a lot of people I meet anyway, they remember it as some amazing. It was the best day of my life, the best gig ever, the best rave ever. And then I just knew that if I went down that route, it wouldn't be true. It wouldn't be true. It wouldn't be truthful because this is life. You know, that there is light and there's shade. You know, with everything. Yeah. And if I watched this documentary and it was all like, oh, wasn't it the best time ever? You know, things were different back then, and it was all jovial. I would watch it and go, surely that's not the full story. Right. Just the same as if I watched it and it was like, oh, it was so harrowing. Everyone had a bad time. Everyone got crushed. Yeah. I'd be like, that's not the full story either, because, like I said, I come from it from a journalistic point of view, and so basically everyone that was there dancing had a great time for the most part that I spoke to, and then anyone whose job, or most people whose job it was to keep anyone safe or was behind the organization of it. Had a pretty traumatic experience, right? To put it bluntly. For example, a police officer that I interviewed in the film, who was working, who was one of, because they were only expecting 50,000. The numbers of police were so small when, like 5 times that amount turned up. It was almost like they weren't there at all. And so he has this experience that he shares with us, which is really kind of him. I mean, if I could just, it must have been awful. Yeah, go on.
Yeah, well, no, exactly. You can tell he's still traumatized by it. I mean, what I think was brilliant about your film. I mean, if you'd told me beforehand, there'd be interviews with a member of the city council and a policeman in charge of public safety and a guy in charge of events, I would have thought, I don't know, but it actually. It works really well. They're interesting. It weaves in well with the story. So
thank you, man. Thank you.
Because I think it is a very it is an interesting perspective that they bring to this, because they must have. I mean, another side of you must have been thinking, weren't they just so irresponsible for even doing this? In the first place, and then making that call to go ahead. I mean, I think that you talk about it in the film. They made the call to go ahead because they were told the alternative could be even worse.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, they can. It gets addressed in the film. Norma Cook talks about it. Like, there's that many people in one place. They've come for the gig. If they pull Fatboy Slim's set, like, where are all these people going to go?
Yeah,
and like, it could be dangerous.
And I wonder
if people are dancing and having a good time. I mean, that's better than just standing around drunk and high, like looking for somewhere to go or something to do.
Well,
right?
I mean, I wonder too if he was also thinking back to his experience at Woodstock '99, because I mean the people actually crashed a bus into his set. Basically, I don't know if you know much about that story, but he was there, and it was just I mean, the film was originally supposed to be called Clusterfuck, but they had to change it to Trainwreck because of at the last minute on Netflix. But we interviewed the filmmakers, but it's like this incredible scenes there. They show him, he looks even more scared than he does in that one scene you've got that you show in your film.
Yeah, I wonder if it did. I wonder if it was on his mind a little bit. I wonder if it was. What's interesting about it's interesting that you mentioned Woodstock '99 a couple of times, because that came out while I was making this film, and I was well, I mean, I've seen a few documentaries.
There's several. There's I shouldn't say this, but there's too many.
I enjoy them, but it was interesting because I thought it's like it's very similar. Well, it's not a similar story. It's a similar story in that it's about an event,
right?
But Woodstock was all ticketed, and it was from the perspective of people trying to make money off people, jacking up the prices of water. The infrastructure fell apart. The infrastructure fell apart, and even then, although I believe people do have some personal responsibility, I would say the problems were to do with the infrastructure, and the planning and the money grabbing nature of the people that set it up. And I would actually give no blame on any of the bands at Woodstock '99. There's metal festivals all the time. There's new metal festivals all the time. Right. And they don't descend into that. So that's my view on Woodstock '99. Mine shows, I think, a different side to the same coin of human behavior, crowd psychology, in that, and I think and the crowd psychologist I interview, who actually was one of the stewards at the gig, I interviewed another crowd psychologist as well, say that crowd behavior actually prevented disaster there. It prevented crushes, it prevented drownings. People looked after each other because the police and the ambulance couldn't get to you. So it's kind of like it's so funny because I listened to your podcast with the people who made Trainwreck, Woodstock '99, and that one of the gentlemen said it was like anarchy. It was like a social experiment in anarchy. And I thought, yes, that's what mine was too. But I don't think he understands the meaning of the word anarchy. Anarchy is actually positive. People look after each other. It wasn't like if we're left to our own devices, I see the world in a way that we look after each other when we need to, right? And that's what true anarchism is about. And so that's what I think we got to the heart of, which is like there are some factors that are at play. People who are from the rave generation, maybe they're into taking ecstasy rather than drinking vodka and sniffing cocaine and having fights. That might have played a part of it.
But, a small part.
And maybe there was the nature of Fatboy Slim and the music and his identity. Maybe people were more loved up in that setting. I think there's something to be said for that. But I do think it's a real miraculous story. It's both a miraculous story because
I agree.
I have to acknowledge that one person did die. This woman called Karen Manders, and she was a nurse, and she'd been to a party after the event and drunk and perhaps drunk, I don't know, but she fell off the escarpment, the Esplanade area, and she fell off and she sadly died. She hit her head and she died, and that was really tragic. And that is in the documentary, and that was something that I was really adamant on keeping in, on getting in, and actually building Norman Cook's trust enough that I could ask him about that on camera, because it's a difficult thing. Someone dies at your gig. It's heavy. It's heavy, and I only met Fatboy Slim while I was doing this project. He's not an old friend of mine, so that was hard to broach that topic. But I think when you zoom out a little bit, it is a miracle that more people didn't die. It's a miracle people didn't drown. There wasn't crushes, and people kept each other safe. And this is what one of the psychologists, the crowd psychologist, says: the crowd prevented disaster, which is not the narrative that it often runs, which is mob mentality, which is people can't be trusted, that things break down and that we act like animals, which again is another misconception. Actually, animals look after each other. Acting like animals is quite a good thing. We should do that more often. But I think mine shows a different element to actually people together in one place can actually look after each other. And of course there were injuries, and of course there was a lot of mess afterwards, which is one thing that a lot of Brightonians, because I live in Brighton now, I moved down while I was making the film. A lot of Brightons talk about that. Oh, did you know the beach smelled like piss for weeks afterwards? And I think, I know that, and I put that in the film, but it's not exactly, that's not the main part of the story. Come on, it's like the time when the beach smelled like piss for a week. Who cares? But I put that in, and I think all these kind of the build up and the aftermath is important to put in there. I think it's fair to say that, people do live in Brighton. People do work on the seafront. People do come here for holidays. Some people, it's just their home. They've always lived here. And all these people coming to one place and leaving it a mess and glass and urine everywhere and what have you. These are the people that have to put up with that. I wanted to capture that as well. Like, again, it's kind of, I didn't want to be a buzzkill. I think the documentary is in its nature celebratory, but I was also like I said before, things there's light and dark in a lot of things. Like there's consequences, and there's the people who you affect negatively, positively by any event like this, by anything you do. So I try to capture that. I think there's a bigger story even in there, but I'm yet to work it out.
Well, I think, just personally, I do find crowd psychology a very interesting thing. So one of the best books I've read was by an American journalist about English soccer hooligans, and it was all about it. Weaved in a lot of this whole psychology side of things, and just as that was of its milieu, if you will, when that was happening in the 70s, 80s, and not to, I think one thing about the Woodstock docs is there were at least two of them. One of them really dealt more with the sort of societal side of things, and the people we had on weren't dealing with it as much. They were looking more at, as you kind of said, the infrastructure and the greed that was behind that story. But there were different things going on in the U.S. in the 90s versus Britain in the England in the 90s. I think is part of it, but it doesn't explain it all. But I think, as you've pointed out, your film's also, it's, as you say, you've just moved down there in the last few years, but it's an homage to Brighton. I would say it's about this music. It's about the culture of the time, the zeitgeist of the time. It's about a lot of things. It's not a Fatboy Slim biopic, but I think it touches on. It's about crowd control. It's about all these things.
Well, thanks a lot. It's interesting you say about crowd control, because like what I also think is the event is also not only a sign of, the goodness that people can do and how we can look after each other, but also it's a bit of like a cosmic warning. The event it was like okay, don't do this again, because someone died and it was very dangerous. It was kind of like it as Becky, the woman that worked for the council, says in the film, she said it would have been a matter of time before they had another event that was similar that could have got really out of hand. So this was like a kind of the universe drawing a line in the sand and going, listen, okay, you flew too close to the sun this time, but but that very rarely happens. Things do go wrong, and this was like this is a strange time a strange event where it was like this almost went really wrong. But it didn't. But don't do it again.
I think that's maybe we leave it there, not for the podcast, but for that part of it. I think that's a very good way to end that. Is this? You said you've done other documentaries, but this is your first big project, is it? Or
yes.
So it was your idea. What came? What part of you said, I'm going to make a doc. I mean, not only just make a doc about this, but it's going to be a. Did you envisage that it was going to be an hour and a half and be streaming on Sky when it was all said and done?
No, I didn't at all. So so this is my debut feature length as a director, and I directed and wrote it. And I've worked on documentaries, shorter documentaries in the past. I've been producer, director, location scout. I've been hosted. I've directed. But for a long time, I've written for newspapers and magazines.
Right.
Vice, The Guardian, DJ Mag, Kerrang magazine, all sorts of places. Yeah. And so I guess my history is I'm a storyteller, and I just find the ways in which the stories can be told the best. So whether that's a podcast or written article, or
right.
And so this, where it came from was it was the early days of lockdown, and I was looking for ideas as always, and I'd not long been full-time freelance. I used to be a youth worker working with teenagers in London, and then I got made redundant, and I tried to reframe that because it was quite disorientating at the time.
Yeah.
I tried to reframe it as this is an opportunity. Why don't I go freelance full-time? Because I've always written and I've made documentaries for a long time and podcasts, on the side of full-time work.
Yeah.
So I started at the end of 2019. I started working full-time freelance, and then I was looking for ideas and trying to expand. How can I make a living out of this? How can I work on bigger projects apart instead of articles every couple of weeks? And this was one where I thought I was watching the videos of the gig because the actual concert it was released the following year or the same year maybe as a concert film, and it's great. It's great to watch. Pardon me. It's great to watch. It's just like watching the original Woodstock DVD or any of those festival kind of DVDs. It's great fun. So I was watching that and I thought, imagine that many people in one place, like in the lockdown when we were socially distancing. I thought, imagine that many people in one place. So to keep myself and my girlfriend at the time and our housemates entertained, we used to put it on a Friday night on the big TV, put the concert DVD on, and just and kind of pretend that we were there. And I did think there's a story here somewhere. I thought maybe it's an oral history following the people that went there. Maybe it's maybe there's a documentary in it. And so my idea hasn't changed that much since then. My idea was find the people who went, the people, there's plenty of them, but find the stories from the people that went, the people that organized it and the police that worked it, and also get Norman Cook's point of view, Fatboy Slim, because I thought this means a lot to different people for different reasons. I just knew that because of you can see some discourse about it online on Facebook and stuff like that. And so I pitched it to Fatboy Slim's manager, Katie.
Yeah.
So because I was like, I thought I could do it all without him. If it was going to be a written article, I thought I could do it without him. It might be quite interesting to be like, he's the kind of hole in the donut that makes the donut what it is, But I pitched it to him and I thought it'd be good to get him involved, and let's see if I can do something. So I pitched it on a whim. One of the many emails I sent out, that day, pitches, half-baked ideas. Some of them are stuff that I've been working on for a long time. Pitched it out there, crossed my fingers, went to sleep, woke up the next day, and she emailed back, Katie. I was like, fucking hell, I can't believe it. Like, she emailed back saying that she really liked my idea. And this was like very beginning stages. I said, it'd be cool to do an oral history, whether that's like an article or something bigger. I'd love to speak to Norman Cook about it. And she said, well, we like the idea, but how about, and she really gave me a great opportunity. She was like, well, why don't we do something bigger? And I was like, all right, cool. And then I just disappeared, and I was like, it didn't email back immediately. And I thought, okay, cool. And I just worked days on this treatment for a documentary.
I was wondering about that. Yeah.
Yeah. And then I was like, now's my shot. She's emailed back. I've got my foot in the door. If it never comes to anything, I've not lost anything. So I thought, I'm going in. So I sent her this big documentary treatment, which I had some friends of mine look over and make sure it all made sense and stuff. And then she was into it, and that was in 2020, and and she was into it, and then since then it's just been a case of my friend, my colleague slash friend Ben, who's worked on documentaries that he's worked for the BBC and stuff. He's a producer, a shooting producer, and a great director.
Yeah.
I spoke to him really early to ask for some advice, like, hey man, like, I've got a really good opportunity here. Like, can you literally tell me what these words mean? Can you tell me what this means? I didn't study filmmaking in college or school or anything or university. I studied journalism, so my whole life has been writing. So I was like, listen, mate, I'm gonna ask you a bit of advice. And then he was so supportive. He said, well, and I said, actually, why don't we work together on it? You know, he's a producer, I'm the director. And since 2020, it's just been me and him, and then an editor who came, who we got on board later on, obviously when we filmed it. It's just been us making it. So three freelancers, and that's it. And it's been amazing. And then when his manager, you know, liked me, we met each other, we talked a lot, and she liked my idea. Like I said, the idea hasn't changed much. It was like the people's point of view, the people that were there, not some genius piece about Fatboy Slim and how good he is and how that was another thing that I wanted to steer away from. Was I don't mind these documentaries. I don't mind them. I've watched a million of them where they have a lot of other artists or journalists from the NME or journalists from Rolling Stone or like all the kind of heads from the time talking about, Fatboy Slim's so good for these reasons. I mean, I've always had this. I find the everyday people, that is a bit of a pejorative term, but I prefer normal people. I don't think celebrities are that interesting personally. And this is across all of my journalism. I'm not like, obsessed with interviewing Beyonce or Tom Cruise or anyone like that. That doesn't interest me at all. I'd rather interview, Sharon, who lives down the road, and what's her story? You know what I mean? So that's been my approach to this documentary, and I think they like that because Fatboy Slim he hasn't got a big. He's a down to earth dude. You know, he's not like he's not got some big ego that needs satiating. Where he's like, I want everyone to love me for these reasons. There was even talk of him not even being in the documentary at all at one point. I was around his kitchen talking. He said, maybe there's a way of me not being in it.
Interesting.
And then we realized. Well, I realized it would be cool to have. It would be way cooler to have him in.
I think it works. Definitely.
He's not really the. I tried not to make him the focus. I tried to give as much screen time to, the ravers of which
you do. Yeah.
The ravers as much as we do the police officer, the people who worked there, his manager, and him. So that was it. So this is a long way.
So they weren't even precious. Well, I know. I was just sorry. I just interrupted you, but they weren't even precious about. It wasn't like one of these things because I'm aware of these sort of pitches with other types of celebs where, you got to get a certain director on board. They were happy you being the director.
Well, yeah. This was a massive thing for me because they've worked with Spike Jonze. Like, think about Fatboy Slim's music videos.
Exactly.
He's worked with like some of the best people you could work with, and so it wasn't easy. I'll tell you that. It was imposter syndrome doesn't even come into it. Like it was like, okay, I'm going to do this, and it was like, do you know what? I'm quoting from the film. Yeah. I can't not deliver. I can't not deliver. My whole life has been building up to this moment. That's what they say in the film. My whole life has been building up to this moment. I can't not deliver. So I worked my ass off. I learned everything. I read books and books about how to make documentaries. And obviously I have, I wasn't coming into it totally dry. I've interviewed thousands of people. I've written for years. I've made podcasts. I've made short documentaries. I wasn't coming into it cold, but kind of being trusted with this because there's another element to this where it is an amazing story. Like I'm not creating the story. The story exists and the story is fantastic. It's so multifaceted. It's so interesting. And unlike Woodstock 99, there hasn't been any other documentaries about it. Right.
Yeah. Did that surprise you? Because I was a little surprised that there's Well, go ahead.
Yeah. Well, do you know, I was a bit surprised, but then I think they didn't agree to make a documentary with anyone. Like, I think people must have asked over the years. And also, it's 20 years old now. That event is 20 years old. if I made the documentary 10 years ago, 10 years after the event, I don't think it would have been as good, and I don't think enough time would have passed for the people involved with it to, I don't know, to be able to reflect in the way that people can over 20 years, and for the world to have changed enough for it to be interesting.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, and that's why Woodstock 99 works. That's why, 20 years is quite a good a good length of time for people to be like, okay, things have changed since then, but it's recognizable. It's not like making a documentary about the 50s. It's
right.
I think the early 2000s is probably the most recent you could do a kind of historical documentary like mine, right? Because if you did something about the 2010s, it's not that interesting, because I still feel like I'm in the 2010s. But so that's where I came from. So it's a massive opportunity, and do you know what? Like, I've got a huge respect and gratitude for Fatboy Slim and his management, Katie and Gary, for taking a chance on me, because it's I knew I had it in me, but it was just getting the opportunity, man. Like, it's as a freelancer, it's just like you to get an email back is like getting blood from a stone sometimes. So it's a great opportunity, and I think I'm happy with the film. So it got picked up by Sky after we'd finished it, so I made it almost exactly how I wanted it to be. So it's
amazing.
There was a bit of toing and froing with some of the execs, so people from his label, and Fatboy Slim himself had a few ideas, which I actually welcomed them all, because I actually wasn't at the event, so there are parts of the story that and I'm 32, so I was too young to have been there. Really. I would have been 11 years old, and so there are parts of me where it's like, tell me everything you know. What do you want the documentary to be like? And other parts where it's Norman Cook. He's a creative guy. I was like, what do if you've got an idea, like, I'll take it seriously. So it was a bit of toing and froing, but in general, I'm very happy with it. It is true to my vision, I think, from a very original vision. It's true to that, and then Sky got on board afterwards, which is great, because it's like I said, it's almost exactly as I wanted it to be.
And I mean,
it's never going to be exactly as I wanted it to be, is it?
No, well, nothing ever is. But I mean, so I mean, how did you finance this? I mean, did Norman Cook's help with this, or is it? I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. It's often how it works.
No, he didn't finance it at all. It was through financiers called Beyond.
Okay.
Beyond TNC, and they got on board through BMG Films, his label, of a film department. And so we worked with them. So I mean, I said, it was 3 freelancers that made the whole thing. Like, obviously we couldn't have if we weren't helped out with the money, but as far as the crew goes, it wasn't a production company. It was
that's amazing.
It was and we were chipping away at it on a shoestring before we got the budget. So we were filming, me and my friend Ben, we were interviewing people, because you work on something to get it to, like, it was like a passion project, and until we got the funding,
it was a pure passion project, I bet.
Honestly, until we got the funding, it was like I was braced for it to be pulled away from us, just because, they don't owe me anything. I'm not like I haven't got the might of a production company. They could have just taken my idea or the idea and given it to someone else. So I was braced to be like, well, if it happens, it happens. Until we got the funding, and then the funding was like, you've got this much money to make it, and then you can go and do it. And then a great thing, all the archive footage in it, which is very archive heavy. There are quite a few interviews now, but it's archive heavy. And I remember I went to Fatboy Slim's management one day, and he's like, you should come and have a look what tapes we've got. And I thought, okay, cool, maybe they'll have the odd VHS tape. And I walk in, and his Anglo management is on a boat, which is cool.
It is cool.
Their HQ's on a boat on the Thames. And I walked in, and there's just boxes and boxes and boxes of dusty VHS and Betamax tapes in there, right? From like 1992 to like now. Well, till people stopped doing it, stop filming them. And some of them have Some of them have like a good description, like Fatboy Slim being interviewed on MTV Base or whatever it says.
Right.
And then some of them have just got 1995 written on it. And you think, all right, let's have a look at that. So it was like, honestly, it was a treasure. It was like finding treasure, buried treasure. And some stuff that had been filmed that had never been seen, and I can kind of tell by the stuff that was on there. You're like, wow, like that. I wonder what that was for. But he never got, he never got released. Some stuff was like gone.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say, maybe you can tell some of our listeners and viewers what are the kind of things that that's never been seen before. That's something they always highlight, right, with these things, never before seen footage. But I mean, what kind of things are you're already describing it, but
yes, yeah. Well, do you know there is. So for the gig itself, so like I said, it was released on a DVD, a concert DVD, which is great. But we obviously have all the rushes, the isolated cameras from the day.
Wow.
So we really had fun with that because the cameras are running. The cameras are running from the afternoon till after everyone leaves, pretty much.
Right.
And we really have fun just watching it through, trying to pick different angles, different people to focus on, different kind of ways to tell the story from different points of view from the concert. And also, I mean, spoiler alert, but finding some of the interviewees, the ravers, in the archive footage was
well, there was
exciting parts of my life.
I've seen the film and I was like, wait a minute, that does look like the 20-year-old younger version of that person you've just been talking to, but wasn't 100% sure because some of us don't age as well as others in over 20 years. But yeah, no, that was quite impressive. I mean, it gets me. I mean, there's. How did you find these people? I mean, you're a journalist, so I guess that's part of it. You're experienced in tracking people down and things, but it's amazing because then you build these stories from all these people you tracked down. Yeah, definitely. So, sorry to go back to your archive question, and a lot of the archive is basically from his career from 1996 until 2002, whether that's touring in Japan, whether that's their album release tours, their gigging in America, going to Red Rocks, playing with the Chemical Brothers, exactly.
All this stuff. Some stuff has been seen, some stuff hasn't. So that's what the other archive is. It's great fun. If you're a real Fatboy Slim fan, you might have seen some of it, but for most people, it's hidden gems, I would say. And then how did I find the people? So Facebook's pretty good. Facebook's a good tool. Like, I mean, Facebook's inherently quite a bad place to hang out, I think, sometimes. But in general, for finding people, it's great. And so for meeting new people, for me as a journalist, I use it a lot. And so there was a lot of Facebook groups, a lot of like Brighton music groups, Brighton, Brighton locals, Brighton notice board that you'd post in there and start speaking to people, or you'd look on Twitter, or I'd look on. And then I had a brainwave of asking Fatboy Slim. This is when I built a relationship with him, asking him to set up an email address called bigbeach@fatboyslim.net. And I was like, mate, like, can you do me a massive favor? Because I'm getting some good stories, but I've got a feeling the best ones I haven't quite found yet. So I said, do you mind posting on your social media? He's got 7 million followers across all of them. Posting on there, has anyone got any stories? And this was an important part, photos or video. Photos would have been was hard to find. Because people were off their head and they had like a dodgy old camera. And
it was before smartphones, so
exactly. Some people had digital camera photos, but barely any. Yeah. So I said, can you post on your social media and kindly request, has anyone got any photos from the Big Beach Boutique 2 or any stories? Email into here. And he gave me access to that email address. Just me access. Just me.
That's amazing.
Yeah, it was amazing. And what did I get? Thousands and thousands of emails because there's 250,000 people who went. So
exactly.
And there's thousands of emails which I liked and I enjoyed and I spent days reading them. Ones where there's just like, I had the best time. I was dancing on the bus stop and I was taking loads of ease and I snogged this bloke and we were swimming in the sea, and these are lovely memories where you're like, that's cool. Thanks for sharing. And then you'd even get people emailing in going like, oh, I remember the traffic was really bad. I live in Brighton and the traffic was all the way to Gatwick. You mean you've had to be in your bonnet for 20 years about the traffic. I was like, thanks for sharing. And then you'd get people going people talking about the rubbish and the piss and the glass afterwards. And
Right.
I hear you.
Yeah.
And so there's all that, but mainly it was people saying how much of a good time they had. And that was great to read, because I thought that reinforced my belief in the project. I was like, this is good. This means a lot to a lot of people.
Right.
And then it was me sifting through those, a lot of phone calls, and meeting people in cafes in Brighton, because I moved to Brighton around the same time. Meeting people in cafes and having a chat with them and working out, is their story interesting enough? Not as harsh. They're all interesting, but does it belong in this film? Does it belong in this story of this film? Because I could have a whole series of people sharing their drug stories or their stories about how dance music changed their life, and they're really good. But I wanted to find some different something that had a bit of an edge or something, a bit of depth that was unexpected, perhaps. And so, as you remember, I don't want to spoil too much, but as you remember from the film, the people that I focus on have got there's a different element to their story, rather than just, as well as I went down and had a good time. But also one of the people that emailed in was a police officer. In fact, I think he was the first person that emailed in to Fatboy Slim email address.
Yeah.
Was that police officer that I interviewed. Yeah, the police officer emailed in, and he was like, he obviously had a traumatic experience, so he wanted to get it off his chest. And so I thought it's important that we show that side of it as well. So that's how I found all the people. It was a lot of work, but it was fun work. I love it. I love speaking to people. It's great, and hearing their stories and kind of going to their houses sometimes and having a chat with them and kind of finding, that's just all part of the fun of it, I think.
But then you also, I mean, like you said, I think you concentrate on like you said, the, for lack of a better way of putting it, everyday people. But you also get John Simm and Simon Pegg and Nick Frost. How did that happen?
So it might seem funny when you watch the film, like why are they in this film? Simon Pegg and Nick Frost and John Simm. But it just become clear why they're in it. I just knew that they were there on the day. You knew that, yeah. I knew they were there because of I saw them in footage. I found them dancing. I found them being interviewed and stuff.
Amazing.
And then just shooted my shot and just emailed them. And like obviously working with Fatboy Slim and the nature of the documentary. Yeah. It was welcomed by them, and Vernon Kay's in it, and Carl Cox is in it, and it was welcomed because it's kind of, I guess it's something that they're not used to talking about in interviews. They might be on their press junket doing, talking about their latest film or the latest TV series. But I was like, no, I don't want to talk about much apart from this event and Fatboy Slim and the late 90s, and they were interesting because where they were in their careers at that time was also a very exciting and kind of auspicious time where it's like Simon Pegg and Nick Frost had just released Spaced and it had done really well. And then they were about a year or two later, they released Shaun of the Dead, and then they really became big. John Simm had been in Human Traffic, which was a bit of a cult classic clubbing film in the UK. And then he went on to do amazing, massive things. So it's a special moment. It's a strange moment in their careers where they're like moving into bigger things. So to have them talking now and have the archive footage of them was great fun, And one of the rules that we stuck with, apart from Carl Cox, who is a Brighton lad, and I like him a lot, and I think that he brings a lot to the early rave scene part of the documentary, because he wasn't actually at the Fatboy Slim gig. Apart from that, everyone that's in the film was at the gig. So the kind of motto between me and my editor Owen was, if you weren't there, you're not in the film. Like if you weren't at the gig, you're not in the film. And that kind of, I think that really puts people in the moment. It's not like commentators talking about it, but looking back on it as a kind of moment. Even the commentator that we do get, a commentator, maybe that's a harsh way to put him. The journalists that we get, the two journalists that we get, Ralph Moore and Nick Stevenson, they both worked for Mixmag, and they were both there on the day. And Nick Stevenson, Stevenson was like, "This was my first big assignment." And that was his first big assignment for Mixmag, going to the Big Beach Boutique and raving it up. And now he's the managing director of Mixmags. You think, like, come on, like that. Even that's an interesting story, and he gets to give like a cultural, journalistic POV on why it's important for dance music. So you weren't on the beach, you're not in the film. That was our kind of thing. And Owen, my editor, I learned so much from Owen and from Ben. I learned so much, and they supported me, and they're just it's such a collaboration when you make a film, and when you do most creative things, it's a collaboration. And they were just they were cool, man. They broadened my mind. They opened my creativity in ways that I didn't know it could be opened, and they kind of supported me, and they were patient. And like I said, because it's my first feature length, there are gaps in my knowledge. I didn't study film. I'm a journalist, really, by trade, and so I just had to lay it on the line with everybody. Even the sound mixer, the grader, the guy who worked in the graphics, everyone at the where we did the post. I was like, I'm going to ask some stupid questions. Okay, I'm going to ask some really stupid questions. I said, and about abbreviations, about acronyms, about terminology that I don't understand. I have a vision for this. Sometimes I can't articulate it in the way that other filmmakers might. And so I was just laid my cards on the table, because I thought it's just going to be counterproductive if I try and blag my way through it and pretend that I know everything about making films. I just thought that's not going to work with this, because we need to make the film. I can't be bullshitting people. So I was honest, and I was vulnerable, and I was like, listen, be patient with me, please. I'm working it out, but this is my first big job. And they were all really patient with me, and they were really supportive and helpful. And it was like a crash course in how to make a feature film. Every single part of it, not every single part of it, but most of it was a learning opportunity for me, which is great. Which is like, it's like what my 10 years of being a journalist has been building up to, right? It's like, it's all about learning. And I learned how much I didn't know, which is always helpful, because you think every time you have a bit of an ego about you, a bit of a swag, I think I know what I'm doing here. And then you get knocked back down, and that's quite helpful. That's good. I make mistakes, I learn from them, and I move forward. And that this was a really big thing for me personally and professionally. And I'm glad that people are enjoying it.
Well, I certainly did, and congratulations. And I would say I never would have guessed it's your first feature. I think
nice.
And I think it's good to. I'm not originally in the film world either, but kind of not really am now in many ways. But sometimes it's good to just be the one that asks what may seem like a basic, stupid question, and you sometimes find that these people think, well, wait a minute, that's actually a good point. We've never thought of it that way, So I think
what I learned from being a youth worker, the only stupid question is one that is unasked. Okay?
Right. Yeah.
There you go.
Said like a good youth worker. Oh my goodness, you're betraying your your past. So what's the plan? I mean, besides enjoying this and living on cloud nine for a little bit, do you have any, another doc, another feature?
Yes.
What are you thinking?
So I was thinking about this earlier all day, in fact. I'm working on stuff, man. Like, I am basking. I'm on cloud nine. I'm basking in the glory of something that I'm really proud of. But I'm writing. I've, wrote something for ID magazine last week, and I'm writing something for Hook magazine at the minute about anarchism. I wrote about the early goth scene last week in the 80s in London, and I'll just keep going, man. I've got big ideas for feature docs, and now I've got contacts and kind of the not the momentum perhaps to kind of realize them and get them made, maybe get them made. I'm not short of ideas, I'll tell you that, but I've got ideas for shorter docs. I've got a podcast coming out this year, which I worked on all through last year.
Okay.
Which I'm really proud of and really happy with. So we edited this film in 10 weeks. It was a quick edit.
Amazing.
Yeah. And so all that I did quite it was a very productive year for me last year. So I've got the podcast coming out in a few weeks, month maybe, who knows. And then And then I'm open-minded. I'm open to anything. If anyone's listening, they want to work with me. I am a free agent. I'm looking for people to collaborate with. You know, I've got so many ideas, and do you know what this has given me personally is a big stamp of approval. You know, like not that I needed it, but perhaps, but it just makes you think I'm on the right path. And it's better to be on the beginning of the right path than on further down a path that you don't want to be on, right? That's a quote that I read, and it's true. I feel like I'm at the beginning of this my documentary making path, and my mind is open, and I'm alive, and I'm reading, and I'm watching, and I've got loads of ideas. I'm trying to work out how to tell those stories visually, or is it an article, or is it a podcast? It's cool, and it's cool. I feel really optimistic about the future, and I feel like it's big. It beats getting a real job, right? A normal job. So it's and then in Brighton, if anyone's listening, I started a monthly night of talks about music and subculture. So we have different musicians, authors, filmmakers. We have everyday music obsessives. They get on to the stage and they talk for 15 or 20 minutes about music or subcultures. So that's what I've started down here to kind of get myself out of my bedroom and meet real people in the real world. Because when you do what I do, you spend a lot of time on the laptop.
Exactly.
Not great for my understanding of how things work. So so I'm doing all sorts, man. Like I think the difficult second documentary I've got it in mind, but hey, another idea might come along tomorrow that's even better.
Okay, well, and there's links to a lot of that stuff on you have an eponymous website, don't you? We can put a link to it in the show notes, I think. But
that's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, get in touch.
Yeah.
Give me a shout.
Yeah, well, exactly. Check it out. There's some interesting articles on there that I didn't have a chance to read yet, but I'm going to check those out. And just to say, Jack, it's been great to have you on Factual America. Thanks for coming on, and unfortunately, we're coming to the end of our time together. But just to remind our listeners, we've been with Jak Hutchcraft, director of Right Here, Right Now. He also wrote the film, and as you've heard, did a lot of other things. And it's streaming on Sky Docs and Now TV now in the UK, and will be. Well, just check your local listings, as they used to say. It will be near you at some point in the near future. Jak, thanks so much. Great to have you on.
Cheers, Matthew. Lovely to meet you, man.
Great to meet you. And I do get down to London a decent amount, so maybe we can meet up sometime. Or at least we'd certainly love to have you when you've got your second feature doc in the can.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Great to have you on. Take care, and we'll best of luck with everything.
Cheers, man. Cheers.
See ya. Take care. I also would like to thank those who helped make this podcast possible. A big shout out to Sam and Joe at Inner Sound Audio in York, England. A big thanks to Amy Ord, our podcast manager at Alamo Pictures, who ensures we continue getting great guests onto the show and that everything otherwise runs smoothly. Finally, a big thanks to our listeners. Many of you have been with us for 4 incredible seasons. Please keep sending us feedback and episode ideas, whether it is on YouTube, social media, or directly by email. Please also remember to like us and share us with your friends and family, wherever you happen to listen or watch podcasts. This is Factual America, signing off. You've been listening to Factual America. This podcast is produced by Alamo Pictures, specializing in documentaries, television, and shorts about the USA for international audiences. Head on down to the show notes for more information about today's episode, our guests, and the team behind the podcast. Subscribe to our mailing list or follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Alamo Pictures. Be the first to hear about new productions, festivals showing our films, and to connect with our team. Our homepage is alamopictures.co.uk.